see y'all tonight. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Over the last 2 weeks, we've been working on guard passing in our fundamentals program, and we've looked at two really important guard passes, those being the leg drag, and then last week was the Toreando pass. Both of these guard passes are what we call outside style passing, meaning I'm kind of far away from my partner, passing around the outside of their legs to get on top of them. This week, we're going to look at one more guard pass, but this is going to be the direct opposite of that. This is going to be a pressure pass. We're going to be looking at our double underhooks. Now, our double underhook pass is a pressure pass, meaning that we're going to be applying our weight into our partner to fold them and get to a more dominant position like side control. Now, I first want to make sure that we're very clear. There's a big reason why we don't normally teach beginners pressure passing. This is one of the only pressure passes we're going to learn in the fundamentals class, and the reason for that is because beginners don't have good centers of gravity and understanding how to biomechanically move while driving their weight into something. Oftentimes, when learning pressure passes, beginners tend to throw their body weight too haphazardly and end up getting swept or even worse, submitted. So we need to, with that context in mind, approach pressure passing very controlled and conservatively, right? We don't want to go crazy when we're driving into these pressure passes here because, again, if you're not careful, you're going to get swept, you're going to get submitted, and you're going to be in for an unfortunate time. Now, we're going to look at two variations of our double underhook pass tonight. Our first variation is just going to be our super basic bread and butter variation. The second variation is going to be when we encounter a much more sort of flexible and varied guard. We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's first talk about the context we were looking at last week when my opponent was pulling me into that closed guard position. So I ended up here in the closed guard. We never want to accept this position. This is a dominant position for the bottom person. My goal should immediately be to try to stand and break the closed guard. So last week we worked on breaking the closed guard open. To do this, I collected his collar and a single sleeve as I built up to a standing position with the sleeve grip. Once I was here, I started to push the inside of the knee. As soon as I create the pop on his guard, I immediately disengage and go to our low bear crawl style position. And this is where we set up our outside passes, leg drag, and the Toreando pass. Tonight, however, we're going to look at our double underhook pass. I'll demonstrate it first, and then we'll break it down. Here we go. So this is our double underhook pass. Again, this is a pressure pass. I'm going to be driving my weight into my partner to essentially fold them in half. The goal of this pass is kind of pain compliance. We're going to be putting the bottom person in a very uncomfortable position where they essentially are going to allow us to pass their guard because it just doesn't feel good. But first, let's talk about our entry. All passes require some form of entering into the passing position from where we will then finish. So let's look how we're starting here. I'm going to be starting in my good bear crawl style position. So that means my legs are back away from his feet. My hands are the things that I'm using to control him first. From here, my sort of indicator for what pass I'm going to be setting up are his feet, are his frames. A good guard player will keep their knees against their chest with their feet pointing at me. This is going to be a good option to use when our partner's in a good framing guard position. However, if their feet are more down low, this is where we looked at our Toreando passes, we can still force the double under position. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my hands to grab their feet. I'm going to be grabbing either on the soles of the feet, or I'm going to be using my Y blocks right underneath his Achilles. My goal with this is to start to push his feet over his head. As I'm grabbing, I want to start to push his feet over his head. Notice I'm not falling over his head. If I fall, that's uncontrolled movement. We should always be in control of all movement that happens in a match. So as I'm pushing, I'm staying in a good center of gravity here. Now that I've lifted his feet, his frames are no longer pointing at me. I've created a large gap, a space underneath his legs here. I'm now going to level change like I'm getting ready to take a wrestling shot. So I'm dropping down really low, and now I'm going to drive both of my shoulders into the backs of his thighs. When I do this, I'm letting go of the feet, and I'm looking to immediately connect to a body lock. So again, I lift, level change, and now I'm simply going to shoot until my shoulders make contact with his thighs. Notice when I'm grabbing, my hands are locking around his waist. We can start here with a simple gable grip. That's totally fine. So thumbless, pulling in tight. As soon as I get to this position, I want to make sure that I'm keeping weight on my partner. Now, right now, I'm looking at you guys so that I can talk to you and actually teach. This is not the proper position though. In reality, I want to be here. Basically, I want to keep his knees against his face the whole time. Again though, so I can teach you, I'll be looking up at y'all. So once I'm here, I'm going to be driving his knees as close to his face as possible. Bottom person. This should be an uncomfortable position for you. If ever something becomes too uncomfortable, just tap and your partner will stop, and then we'll just kind of reduce the intensity a little bit. But the top person's goal is to make you really uncomfortable. So I want to stay on my toes in that same bear crawl style position. Notice how right below his head. I don't want to go too high because again, I can start to get rolled over. This shows a failure to control your center of gravity. So we want to make sure that we're staying centered right on top of our partner's chest. Let's work our entry first, and then we'll talk about our finishing mechanics. So I'll show one more time from this perspective. So again, I've broken his guard. I'm immediately going to grab and lift. I level change, and now I'm going to shoot so my shoulders hit the backs of his thighs, and I connect my body lock position. Now from here, I want the bottom person, try to make the top person fall over a little bit. 3, 2, 1, and time. And then you'll switch top and bottom. Okay, guys, I'll show one more time from a side view. Here we go. And again, he tries to make me fall. 3, 2, 1, and time. All right, guys, let's try this 2 for 2, and then we'll switch with your partners. Any questions? Let's go. 1, 2. So again, we're going to be doing 2 different variations of this double underhook. For right now, this is like our very basic variation. We'll look at the more, what I consider to be nuanced and frankly higher percentage variation next. But for right now, let's finish where we are. So again, I create that broken structure on my opponent's legs, right? He wants to keep his legs in a nice isometrically sound position. I'm starting to extend the levers here. I drive in and get to my double unders. Now that I'm here in my double unders, my goal is to move my body around his legs to get underneath his legs to the side control. Now, here's the biggest mistake that people make. They start to walk and then they do this. And they like try to throw the legs over the head. This is totally unnecessary. And in fact, what you're doing is you're creating too much space. If I start to try to take my hands away and like grab at his legs and throw them over my head, now you're creating a lot of gaps that your opponent can start to fill into to start to defend their guard. So what I want to do is I want to maintain that strong pressured position the entire time. I'm never going away from them. I am always going to be driving down until I'm totally past their guard. So how do we do that? Let's take a look. So again, I'm here. I'm going to start off first by getting a cross collar grip. So again, I'll sit on my knees so I can teach, guys. I'm going to be taking one hand. I'm going to reach it across, thumb down into the collar right here by the top of the neck here. It does not have to be super deep. I'm not trying to choke him right now. It can just grab nice and loose. My goal with this is to act like a grappling hook to pull myself in towards him. My left hand can grab one of 2 things. I can either grab the back of his belt or the drawstring of his pants. The goal of this grip is to keep his hips off the floor. So again, I just dove into my double unders. I get my cross collar grip and I reach behind and grab either his belt or the drawstring. Now I want to keep his knee in his eyeball. I'm going to start to walk toward his head, and I'm just opening and closing my legs. As soon as I feel his leg pushing against my ear, I'm not going to do this and try to throw his legs past me. I'm simply going to rotate my body. So from here, notice I'm still going down. By rotating my body, I think of this almost like my head is like the dam, and his legs are the water. All I'm doing is I'm just removing that wall to let the water rush past, okay? But I'm not going away from him. I'm simply turning to change the orientation of my body to let his legs go past me, okay, guys? So if we're thinking about our passing concept here, we're accessing levers on their body, and we're starting to fold and turn their guard away from us so that we can box their hips in. Let's look one more time at our finishing mechanics. So I get to my double unders with body lock, cross collar, some form of underside grip here, either with the belts or the drawstring on the pants to keep his hips up. I start to walk towards his head, and now I don't lift, I simply rotate. Notice I'm still keeping his hips up off the floor. The hips are the engine of the body. If his hips start to touch the floor, he can start to hip escape. So I'm going to keep his hips up until I can start to use my knee wedges and box his hip in with my elbow, just like we do with all of our other guard passes, guys. And now from here, I consolidate side control with the cross face for 3 seconds, to get my passing points. Let's look one more time here. I'll do it from this perspective. Nice and slow, guys, without talking. Here we go. Look how I'm taking my time. This is a pressure pass. It should be slow, and it should be miserable for the bottom person, okay? Does anybody have any questions on the finishing mechanics of this first variation? Yes, David. Not necessarily. That collar grip is for me to pull myself towards him. So I'm not driving my elbow, right? I want to use this to pull myself. And just remember, guys, I'm always walking towards that elbow that I'm using to grab with. If I go the other way, no good. I'm going to twist my arms up. So I reach, I walk towards this elbow. Okay, does anybody need to see it again? Yes, yeah, no worries, guys. Absolutely. One more time. I'll do it from this angle now. Slow motion. I box the hip in with my elbow, and immediately I go to crossface him to death, right? That's what we want to do when we crossface someone. Crossface them to death. All righty, guys? Any questions? Let's go. 1, 2. Okay, so we're going to do one more variation. This is going to be a variation that you absolutely need to know, especially if you're going against someone with a very flexible guard. So with this particular variation, the bottom person, I need you to really understand that the whole point behind pressure passing is to make it uncomfortable for the bottom person. So at any point during this variation, if it starts to hurt, just let your partner pass your guard, okay? It's more important to keep yourself safe than it is to defend your guard, okay? But let's talk about this variation. My partner's on their back. So if my partner has a very flexible guard, like they can keep their knees really close to their shoulders here, you know, maybe I even get into my double underhook pass position, but maybe they're just still so flexible, it's just hard to get underneath their legs and finish the pass. We have to have some other option here, okay? Hey, Chris, you want to have a seat for me, bud? Sorry, your head's in the thing. You're good. Sorry, brother. All right, guys, so let me show you what it's going to look like. We're going to now stack our opponent. We're going to stack our opponent. I'll show that slowly. Here we go. All right, so we're stacking our opponent. Stacking is where I take their hips and I put them above their neck. Stacking is a completely legal thing to do. However, it can be kind of a mean thing to do, just like in regular training with your training partners, right? In competition, stack away, but with your normal training partners, just be understanding of what your partner's feeling right now. All right, remember what we talked about. I should never throw my body weight around, especially when we're dealing with a stack. If I have my partner stacked on their neck, I should absolutely never throw my body weight on top of their hips. That's just going to injure people's necks. So we're going to do this very safely in a way that's not going to hurt you at all, I promise. Let's look at it. So we're going to be starting here. Same starting position. I'm fighting with the feet first. I start to access the levers to push his legs away. And now, once his hips have come up, I'm going to start to use my knee to wedge the back of his tailbone. Now I can remove my hands because I've created a placeholder to help keep his hips lifted. My hands are now going to move to his knee pits. Now I'm going to start to press his knee pits to the mat, and now my chest is going to be the thing that ultimately holds his hips up. So now I've stacked my opponent, okay? This is a position that is very uncomfortable for the bottom person, and coach can tell you that. Are you good, coach?
No.
Great. All right, perfect. Here we go. So I'm going to do almost the exact same way of finishing. I'm going to start to fish one hand in, find the cross collar, hold the back of his hips. But now I'm going to get opposite corner rotational control by putting my knee into his elbow on the side I'm passing towards. Now, at any point during this transaction, if my partner starts to feel like this is just too much, they're just going to let their legs go past. And look, you've magically passed their guard. But again, if we're considering like our partner's got very flexible guard and they're very reluctant, all I'm going to start to do is drive my weight down and start to melt right in between their knees and elbows. Once I'm here, I box in the hip and start to look for my cross face and arm isolation. So again, I want to make sure that I'm going slow. Notice I never threw my weight on top of my partner. Totally unnecessary. I'm simply accessing levers on their body to elevate their hips to a stacked position. Okay, let's look at this from the front. So from here, first, I push. My knee reinforces. I go to the knee pits. As I start to push again, my chest goes behind. From here, I start to find a collar grip, and the back of his belt. From this position, I'm going to start to put my knee over his arm, okay? So I want to start to pin that arm down so I have opposite corners under my control. I'm controlling this corner and the opposite corner. Now I'm simply going to start to get my chest in between his knees and elbows, and I can start to finish and consolidate the position. Let's see that one more time from the rear. Okay, again, I'm here. Lift. As I'm lifting, my knee goes behind his butt, and I switch to the knee pits. As I'm lifting, my chest goes behind. From here, I can drop down onto my knees. That's fine, but just remember, I want to keep weight on him. If I just sit back on my knees, he's going to throw his legs back at me. So I don't want to just sit my weight into my feet. I want to keep driving into him. Okay, from here, I grab the collar and the belt, and I pin the opposite corner. And now look, like a stick of butter, I'm just going to melt right into him. As soon as I'm in this, I start to box at his hip and look for my crossface. I'll show one more time slowly without talking from the front. Here we go. Does anybody have any questions on the stacking variation for the double unders? Okay, again, in my opinion, this is far and away the most effective variation of the double underhook, especially because for us lower weight class guys have very good guards. So you have to be able to put them in a really dangerous position, not dangerous, but a very non-dominant, precarious position so that you can pass easier. So please be slow and controlled. Again, bottom person, at any point during this pass, if you feel like something's hurting, literally just let your legs go past your partner and just let them pass your guard. That's kind of the point of this pass, right? Does anybody have any questions? Let's try out our double unders. Let's go, 1, 2. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on these 2 double underhook pass variations that we worked on this evening? This is our pass for the week, so we're going to continue working this pass on Thursday. On Thursday, though, we're going to be focused on systemizing our double underhook pass when our opponent abandons by going to the turtle position. So we'll be looking at turtle attacks. We'll look at our ankle lever and our barrel roll to follow their back as they start to use the turtle to defend the double unders. The one note that I want to mention here, guys, some of us were kind of creating a hybrid of the 2 passes. That's not inherently wrong. I just want you to understand why we're doing 2 different passes. The first pass is very classic, very easy, beginner-friendly, kind of nice on your partner. It doesn't really, put them in a stack too hard. The reason I'm not as big of a fan of this one is because I'm diving my weight into them. Against a really good guard player, this can set up some sweeps and submissions, okay? One of my favorite submissions from here is called a TP choke. I put someone to sleep with it in a tournament, and it's really stupid, and it looks like this. It sucks. Okay, so there's these little stupid things that you can be on the lookout for, right, when it comes to people double underhook passing you. That doesn't mean it's a bad pass. It just means that you need to be far more careful and controlled with how you're approaching this pass. The second variation, though, the stacking variation, I'm not diving my weight in between his knees. I'm behind him. I'm behind his hips, right? I can even kind of hold his belt up and keep his hips up in the air like this. I'm not diving in, right? I saw some people who were doing this. They were getting into a good stack, and then they went here, diving in. Don't dive in. When you dive in, you put your weight on top of springs. Their legs are springs. They can start to shift your center of gravity. So just remember, stay behind them. Now when I'm here, look, I just start to use my head like another limb to open their knees and elbows apart from each other and then finalize the position. Okay, guys? We're going to go ahead and move into some specific training rounds to help us with our passing. Let's grab some water if you need it first. Does anyone have any last-minute questions? Let's go. 1, 2. Grab some.